Hey, night owls, imagine waking up in a forest where the trees whisper like gossiping strangers and the moonlight drips like cold honey onto your pillow. If that doesn't sound like a nightmare you'd swipe right on, you're probably still half asleep. Before we wander deeper, smash that like button if you love getting lost in weirdly wonderful tales, and drop a comment telling me your favorite bedtime monster. Yes, even the one that steals socks. Now dim the lights, curl up with whatever comfort object you hoard like a dragon hoards gold, and let the soft rustle of leaves become the soundtrack to our adventure. You feel the moss underfoot squish like soggy cereal. The air smells of pine mixed with the faint, sweet rot of forgotten campfires, and a distant owl hoots a rhythm that could be a metronome for your scrolling thumb. It's basically TikTok's endless scroll, but instead of cat videos, you get a living, breathing world that actually makes you pause, wonder, and maybe even question why we still check the fridge at 3 a.m. So tell me, would you trade your binge watch marathon for a night under these twinkling branches? Let's find out together. Lyra slipped deeper into the moonlit grove, her boots crunching over a carpet of damp moss that smelled like old rain on stone. Beside her fluttered Nim, a sprite as mischievous as a cat in a laser pointer factory, chattering riddles that made the air fizz with electric giggles. The trees leaned in, their bark slick with sap that glistened like spilled caramel, and the night hung heavy, a velvet drape embroidered with fireflies. Lyra tightened her grip on the ancient staff her grandmother had given her, feeling the pulse of old stories thrum beneath her palm. The first trial rose from the earth in the form of towering willow trees, their branches drooping like the eyebrows of a tired librarian. Each trunk whispered a riddle in a voice that sounded like wind through cracked teacups, demanding answers about forgotten constellations and the taste of moon-kissed berries. Lyra answered with a grin, recalling the legend of the moon-eaten rabbit, and the willows shivered, shedding a cascade of glowing leaves that smelled faintly of burnt cinnamon. Nim snorted, declaring the tree's riddles more tangled than a plot twist in a soap opera, and the grove chuckled in response. Beyond the willows, a river wound like a silver serpent, its surface mirroring the night sky with a fidelity that would shame any Instagram filter. The water sang a low, humming lullaby that resonated with the rhythm of Lyra's heartbeat, each ripple echoing a note of the lost moon song. She knelt to drink, feeling the chill of starlight on her tongue, a taste like crushed mint leaves mixed with the metallic tang of ancient iron. Suddenly, a school of luminous fish darted up, forming constellations that spelled out a warning. Don't trust the shadows that wear sunglasses. The shadows stretched ahead, thick as spilled ink, and Lyra felt the weight of doubt settle like a damp cloak on her shoulders. Each step forced her to confront a memory she'd buried, a night she'd missed the last verse of the moon song, leaving a hollow echo in her soul. Nim, ever the prankster, tossed a glowing acorn at a lurking darkness, which exploded in a puff of glitter that smelled like burnt popcorn. Lyra laughed, realizing that courage sometimes looks like a ridiculous dance in a hallway of mirrors, and the shadows recoiled, their hiss turning into a sigh of relief. At the heart of the grove, a stone altar waited, etched with the fragmented verses of the moon song, each line pulsing like a neon sign in a cyberpunk bazaar. Lyra placed her staff upon it, and the ground vibrated with a bass note that made the moss quiver as if it were doing the Macarena. The final fragment rose, a luminous ribbon of sound that wrapped around her, filling the void with a melody that tasted of honey, rain, and the distant echo of a 90s sitcom laugh track. With the song complete, the grove exhaled, the willows bowing, the river sparkling, and Nim winked, muttering, "Well, that's one way to moonwalk out of trouble." The moon hung low, a bruised silver coin ready to swallow the sun. Villagers whispered that the eclipse was the forgotten moon's sigh, and Kor, the rival chieftain, saw it as a chance to pilfer the altar's ancient fire. He gathered a ragtag band of steel-clad hunters, their armor clanking like a broken drum line. The air smelled of damp earth and burnt pine, a reminder that war always carries a hint of smoke. With a grin as sharp as a broken spear, Kor muttered, "Time to rewrite history, or at least edit the footnotes." Lyra, the grove's keeper, felt the pulse of the trees like a drumbeat against her ribs. She sprinted to the heart of the woods, calling out to the guardians with a voice that cracked like thunder over a summer storm. First to answer was Oryx, the ancient stag, whose antlers were draped in moss that glittered like sequins at a royal ball. The stag lowered his massive head, and the ground trembled, sending a chorus of beetles scattering like startled paparazzi. Lyra whispered a promise to the wind, "We'll guard this altar longer than the longest Netflix binge." As the eclipse thickened, the grove's luminous vines began to wilt, their emerald light dimming to a sickly amber. Each leaf exhaled a sour, metallic odor, as if the forest were coughing up rusted armor. The vine's tendrils curled inward, clutching the soil like an old man's arthritic fingers. Even the night insects fell silent, their usual chirps replaced by an uneasy shiver that brushed Lyra's spine. The darkness felt like a heavy blanket, smothering the scent of fresh sap and replacing it with the stale breath of a forgotten tomb. Kor's men surged forward, brandishing spears that glinted like cheap costume swords from a Halloween store. Lyra and Oryx met them at the altar, where the stone pulsed with a soft blue glow, humming like a low-frequency Wi-Fi signal. The clash rang out, steel singing against bark, and Oryx's antlers cracked like a vintage record skipping on a dusty turntable. Kor, panting, shouted, "This is not the sequel I signed up for," while slipping on a slick of spilled sap that smelled like old cheese. Lyra laughed, the sound echoing through the trees, and tossed a handful of glowing spores that burst into fireworks of violet dust, momentarily blinding the attackers. When the last ember of the vines sputtered out, the eclipse reached its apex, and the altar's power surged like a heart finally breaking free from a chest. A beam of moonlight pierced the canopy, bathing Lyra, Oryx, and even the bewildered Kor in silvery light that smelled faintly of ozone and old rain. Kor dropped his spear, eyes wide, realizing that stealing the altar's power was as futile as trying to download a movie on a stone tablet. Lyra raised her arms, and the grove answered with a chorus of rustling leaves, a symphony that whispered, "Remember us, forgotten moon." The echo lingered, a promise that the grove would rise again, even if the next eclipse came with a side of popcorn. With the courtiers scattered like startled squirrels, the trio pressed onward until the ground gave way to a yawning chasm, its walls slick with moss and echoing with the distant drip of unseen waterfalls. At the chasm's edge, a stone archway emerged, etched with symbols that glowed like neon signs advertising ancient wisdom. Leora stepped forward, the map's green glow syncing with the arch, and a low rumble announced that the citadel was waking from its centuries-long nap. Nim giggled, finally, a place where I can host a rave for the moss. Kale, ever the pragmatist, muttered that they'd need more than a map and a sprite to survive whatever lay inside, hinting that the kingdom's throne might be waiting for them in the darkness below. The trio slipped into the emerald maze, where moss clung to roots like damp velvet, and the air smelled of ancient pine sap mixed with the sour tang of beetle dung. Leora's boots sank into the spongy carpet, each step releasing a soft, squelching sigh that echoed off the towering trunks. Cade muttered a half-remembered rhyme about the forest that never sleeps, while Finn, ever the skeptic, snorted at the idea, claiming the only thing awake were the leeches. A sudden rustle of leaves revealed a flock of iridescent moths, their wings flickering like tiny lanterns in a midnight rave. The path ahead twisted like a dragon's tail, daring them to press on despite the creeping dread that something watched from the bark. When Leora lifted her trembling hand and peered into the fractured glass, the world behind her eyes shattered and rewrote itself. She saw a sun-drenched clearing where humans and forest spirits clasped hands, sealing a pact that bound the tree's roots to the villagers' hearths. The spirits, tall, luminous beings with bark skin and eyes like amber lanterns, offered their protection in exchange for songs sung at every harvest. The vision then cracked, showing the pact's rupture. A betrayal, a burning of the sacred grove, and the silence that followed when the spirits withdrew. Leora felt the cold bite of centuries of regret settle in her gut, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Kale, the grizzled swordsman with a scar shaped like a question mark, scoffed, muttering that resurrecting ancient agreements was as foolish as trying to reboot a cursed video game console. He slammed his gauntleted fist on the mossy stone, sending a spray of spores into the air, and warned that meddling with forgotten magic could unleash more than just nostalgia. Nim, the spry elven scout, twitched her ears and whispered that the mirror's shards sang a low, mournful chant, an omen of a curse that gnawed at the roots of the forest itself. She recalled an old tavern tale about a cursed mirror that turned drinkers into toads, and she shivered at the thought of the party becoming amphibian mascots for the forest. The air grew thick with tension, the kind you feel when a sitcom audience waits for the punchline that never comes. As Nim brushed a jagged fragment from the mirror's edge, a spray of phosphorescent dust puffed into the mist, smelling faintly of burnt incense and old socks. The dust settled on Kale's armor, turning his steel a sickly green that made him look like a budget superhero, the Grumble Green. The shards began to hum, resonating with a low frequency that vibrated the party's teeth, as if the forest itself were humming a bad karaoke version of Stairway to Heaven. Suddenly the ground trembled, roots coiling like giant serpents, and a cold wind whispered, "You have broken the mirror, now the curse will break you." The party's hearts hammered, and even the moss seemed to cringe under the weight of impending doom. In the thick of the melee, Leora lifted the shattered mirror shards, their edges glinting like broken promises, and whispered the ancient oath that had once bound the forest to the kingdom. The shards hummed, resonating with the very soul of the canopy, and burst into a surge of emerald light that washed over the battlefield like a kaleidoscopic tsunami. The light wrapped the vines in a gentle, glowing embrace, coaxing them to soften rather than strangle. For a heartbeat, the forest seemed to sigh, the scent of fresh rain replacing the acrid smell of burnt wood. The pact, long broken, stitched itself anew, binding the kingdom and the woods with a promise as bright as a superhero's neon suit. Lord Varric staggered, his armor sputtering out like a dying fireworks display, and fell to his knees as the emerald light seared his dark ambitions. His legion, now disoriented, fled into the underbrush, tripping over their own shadows like toddlers in a hallway of mirrors. Yet the canopy, newly awakened, began to pulse with a fierce, verdant fury, its vines reaching higher, eager to reclaim everything in sight. The ground trembled, and a low, guttural growl rose from the roots, as if the forest itself were auditioning for a role as a villain in a fantasy blockbuster. The heroes realized that defeating Varric was only the opening act. The forest's renewed wrath threatened to swallow the kingdom whole. With the mirror's light still humming in their ears, the party scrambled to devise a plan that wouldn't end in a leafy apocalypse. Leora, ever the improviser, suggested they coax the canopy's spirit with a banquet of honeyed figs and the occasional sarcastic joke. After all, who can resist a good punchline? As they set the offering, the vines slowed, their grip loosening like a reluctant hug from an overprotective mother. The emerald glow dimmed to a gentle shimmer, promising a truce that felt as fragile as a soap bubble in a windstorm. And so the adventurers emerged from the heart of the emerald canopy, bruised, bewildered, and oddly satisfied, like they'd just survived a season finale of a wildly dramatic, yet oddly wholesome, fantasy series. The ancient pact thrummed like a low drum, and the emerald canopy sighed in relief, its leaves settling into a hush that felt like a velvet blanket over Verdantia. Sunlight slipped through the interlaced branches, painting the mossy floor with shards of amber that danced on dew-slick stones. A gentle wind carried the scent of pine sap and wet earth, mingling with the faint perfume of night-blooming moonflowers, reminding everyone that magic could be as comforting as a warm blanket or as prickly as a hedgehog in a haystack. Birds, previously jittery as caffeinated sprites, now sang a lazy lullaby that made even the grumpy old oak grin. The canopy's protective veil settled, shimmering like a translucent shield, promising safety while looking suspiciously like a glittery superhero cape. Lyra, a spry teenager with more curiosity than sense, stumbled upon the ancient stone gate while chasing a runaway goat that had stolen her sister's pumpkin pie. The gate loomed like a weathered dinosaur skeleton, its moss-covered blocks whispering secrets to the wind. Villagers swore the stones were older than the kingdom's oldest king, and they'd never dared touch the rusted iron hinges. Yet Lyra's heart thumped louder than a drumline, and she pressed her palm against the cold surface, feeling a faint tremor like a cat's purr. An old crone at the well had once told her the tale of the Twilight Woods, a forest that only awakens when the moon wears its silver crown. According to the legend, the woods swallow daylight and spill dreams like spilled honey, guiding lost souls along an enchanted path that glows with hope and mischief. The crone warned that the path tests the traveler's wit, offering riddles that taste like sour grapes and shadows that smell like damp socks. Lyra laughed, recalling the crone's dramatic flair, and imagined the woods as a giant Instagram filter for reality. Still, a shiver crawled up her spine, as if the night itself were listening. Summoning the courage she'd hidden beneath layers of doubt, Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady as a marching band's drumline. She answered the spirit's riddle, what walks on 4 legs at dawn, 2 at noon, and 3 when old. With a grin, it's a human, of course, and added a cheeky, and I'm not a couch potato, I promise. The The water spirit sputtered, its bubbles popping like overinflated party balloons, and the frothy barrier thinned, revealing a path of smooth, moon-kissed stones. As the spirit dissolved into a spray of glittering droplets, it left behind a faint scent of caramel popcorn, a reminder that even mischievous beings enjoy a good snack. Lyra felt a warm glow spread through her chest, a quiet fireworks show of confidence that made her think, I could totally survive a zombie apocalypse if only they liked riddles. With the obstacle gone, Lyra and Nim slipped past the brook, their footsteps now a soft patter that sounded like applause from the night's unseen audience. The moonlight painted silver ribbons across the water, turning the path into a runway fit for a fantasy film starlet. Think Katniss Everdeen meets a mermaid. Nim chuckled, next time we'll bring earplugs, while Lyra laughed, the sound echoing off the trees like a bell ringing in a cathedral. They emerged on the other side, where fireflies gathered like tiny lanterns, and the air smelled of damp earth mixed with the faint tang of adventure. As they vanished into the deeper shadows of the twilight woods, the brook's last note lingered, a reminder that courage, like a good joke, is best delivered when the darkness listens. The temptation gnawed at her like a squirrel with a cracked nut, each thought a crunchy reminder of missed birthdays and unfinished letters. Yet the grove's scent, wet leaves, a hint of wild mushroom, and the metallic tang of distant thunder grounded her in the present, making the phantom's promises smell like stale popcorn. She remembered the night she'd once tried to bake a soufflé and ended up with a kitchen disaster that could have been a horror movie set, and she chuckled at the irony of fearing a ghost more than burnt custard. With a decisive swing of her staff, she brushed away the lingering mist, letting the phantom waver like a bad Wi-Fi signal. The grove seemed to applaud with a sudden rustle of leaves, as if the trees themselves were rooting for her. As the grove exhaled, the night air filled with the soft chirp of owls and the distant howl of a lone wolf, a soundtrack worthy of an epic fantasy trailer. Lyra felt the weight of the silver leaf settle like a badge of honor, reminding her that the past can echo, but it does not have to dictate the path forward. She turned to her companion, eyes sparkling with the same mischievous fire that had drawn her into the woods in the first place. Together they stepped out of the grove, leaving behind the mirrored memories and carrying forward only the stories they chose to write. The twilight woods whispered a final farewell, promising more enchanted trails for those daring enough to listen.